Hello, and welcome to Own Your Retirement. My name is Albert Lalonde from Kaizen Financial. If you like more information about what you hear during our show today, give us a call at 586-752-7008 or visit us online at www.kaizenfinancialinc.com. And while on my website, click on the podcast page to check out our past shows and also to subscribe to our program on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. All right. So, for many people, the idea of retirement feels like a balancing act of trying to enjoy the life you've built today without compromising the security of your future. And as I often tell my clients, two things can be true at once. You can spend on the things you love right now and still save effectively for your golden years. So, during today's show, we're going to look at how to navigate retirement planning without the guilt. We'll discuss why those small daily splurges don't have to derail your strategy and how to protect your long term progress from what we call lifestyle creep, especially as you move through your 40s. Now, let me first introduce, though, my co host, Tony Shore, whose appearance on the show is always as welcome as that first day of spring sunshine. Hey, Tony, how we doing, buddy?
Well, I'm doing good, Albert. I don't know if I've ever been compared to spring sunshine
Well, hey, that's what you are to
before,
me, my friend.
but yeah, yeah, and that's a great introduction. I love the guilt-free angle today.
Yes, yes.
Guilt-free spending. I think a lot of people probably beat themselves up over having a couple of coffees during the week out,
Yep.
from the Starbucks or buying a gadget here or there. So I'm looking forward to hearing how we can find that balance between living for today, but actually still planning for tomorrow and
Yeah.
making sure we're being responsible about it. I know there's always a fine line, and I like the idea of permission to spend, right?
Right. Right.
You hear so many financial advisors say you can't touch that money, you can't touch that money, you can't touch that money. At
Yep.
some point in retirement, especially while you're still able, you need to do things while you can, because you know what, Albert, the one thing I've never seen is a hearse pulling a U-Haul.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
right. You can't take it with you,
Yep,
right?
you
So
got it.
but you can leave it, to your loved ones, but maybe
Mhm.
you wanna spend it on the grandkids while you're still around to see them enjoy it.
Well, that's
So
just it. Yep.
yeah,
Y
yeah,
I mean, you're not promised tomorrow, and people try this. I've seen it all the time, save, 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 and forsake
right,
right now, and then all of a sudden they get to retirement, some health issues come, and next you know, the retirement got cut short for 3, 4 years, and that was it.
yeah,
It's a sad thing to see, so we gotta balance that,
yeah.
obviously, and so we're gonna kick off today's show by referencing a Kiplinger article that's titled "Small Splurges That Won't Derail Your Retirement." Okay? And the article nicely highlights, something I think a lot of people wrestle with, especially once they get into their 40s and start thinking more seriously about retirement. On one hand, you want to be responsible, you want to save, invest, and make sure your future is secure. But on the other hand, you're also living your life right now. But what happens when you spend a little money on something you enjoy? Maybe it's that daily $5 cup of coffee, or maybe it's a new gadget you didn't technically need but really wanted. Or maybe it's something like a designer bag or a special purchase you treated yourself to. A lot of people feel guilty about those kind of splurges, and they worry that spending money today is somehow going to derail the retirement plans 20 years down the road.
Well, right, and, the truth is, though, Albert, it doesn't have to be that way, right?
Yes, and because of two things can actually be true at the same time. You can actually spend money on things you enjoy today and still save responsibly for the future. So,
Right.
enjoying your money doesn't have to come at the expense of your long-term financial goals. Small splurges, like let's say dining out, taking a trip, or even buying something you had your eye on, can absolutely fit into a healthy financial strategy as long as your savings stay on track and those choices aren't forcing you into, let's say, difficult trade-offs. Where things can start to get tricky is when splurging turns into something bigger.
Right. Well, and I think that's where a lot of people can run into trouble, Albert, because occasionally treating yourself doesn't feel like a big deal. But if that becomes the new normal, things can add up. We can, some people get that feeling, the endorphins when they spend money.
Mhm.
So that could turn into something problematic, right? You don't want that to become the new normal where it creeps up without even realizing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what financial service professionals often refer to as what we call the lifestyle creep. It's when your spending gradually
Wait, what
increases
did you call me?
the
Oh, no.
lifestyle creep.
I'm kidding.
You're not a creep, buddy. Remember,
All right, all
you're my
right.
spring sunshine.
I'm teasing.
Well, I mean, think about it. People when they're let's say they're gradually their spending increases as your income rises. It's normal. And instead of putting more of that additional income, let's say towards long-term savings, it gets absorbed into more, let's say, expensive day-to-day lifestyle. Another issue can be when people start dipping into retirement accounts to fund, let's say, short-term spending or to cover debts that came from overspending. That's where things can really begin to erode the progress you've made over the years. And then retirement accounts are really designed to support you decades down the road. And once that money comes out early, well, it can be very difficult to replace the long term growth you might have lost.
Right. And then I think that's especially important for people in their 40s to hear because that's the stage of life where you're earning more than you ever have or earlier in
Mhm.
your career, but you also are juggling a lot of financial reporting priorities, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. In fact,
Yeah.
your 40s are often about protecting what you've already built while still enjoying the life you worked hard to create. And the key isn't eliminating every indulgence or living with constant financial anxiety. It's about balance, just like anything else. If you want to make sure your retirement savings, let's say, is on track, well, but you, let's say, feel a little bit comfortable enjoying your money along the way. So now we're going to talk about how you can strike that balance and how you can spend on those things you love while still building a strong financial future.
Well, and that's what it's all about. I think if somebody wants to enjoy their money today without feeling like they're sabotaging their future, how do they actually make that work in practice? How do you help your clients with that? What advice do you have for our listeners out there?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, and it's something I hear from clients all the time. So, in fact, one of the most common questions that I get is some version of "Can I buy this?" And my answer is usually simple: Yes, if it comes from your discretionary income. In other words, the money that's left over after the important priorities are taken care of, that means your bills are paid. You've built up a healthy emergency fund and your retirement contributions are happening automatically. Once those foundational pieces are in place, well, you have a lot more freedom to enjoy the money that remains.
Well, right. And it sounds like the key here is making sure that the important stuff happens first, right?
You're absolutely right. For example, let's say when it comes to retirement savings, a solid rule of thumb is to, well, at least contribute enough to take advantage of employer's match if your workplace offers a tax advantage plan, like let's say a 401k. Now, that employer match is essentially additional money going towards your retirement, and it's something you don't want to leave on the table. Once that contribution is happening consistently, it becomes much easier to think about the rest of your spending in a more structured way.
Right. And I know that you've talked a lot on previous shows about this organizing finances into different categories. And that's so people can see where their money is going. I know people don't like the budget word, the B word. It's a dirty word to some people, but
Right.
it really is important to know
Yes.
where your money is going and sit down at least like once a month and figure that out. Look at your checking account, look at your credit card statement and say, okay, what are we spending money on? Right.
Yeah. Well, a better way to look at it than budgeting plans, right, or things like that. One strategy that many people find helpful is actually something we call a bucket approach. Okay. So the idea is to divide your finances into different buckets so that each dollar has a purpose. You have to assign jobs for your money. And when you do that, it becomes much easier to see what money is available for spending and what money needs to stay focused on for long term goals. Now, the first bucket is what we might call the fixed expenses. This is where the essentials live. Okay. Think of things like rent or mortgage, car payments, your utilities, insurance, groceries, and just other regular bills that you have every week. This bucket also includes your retirement contributions because savings for your future is one of those non negotiable priorities. So these are the expenses that keep your life running both today and in the years ahead.
Yeah. Well, and so that's the bucket is basically the foundation, right? So
Yeah,
that
you're right.
bucket, the first bucket.
hmm and it's the financial base that supports everything else. So now we talk about the second bucket. That is your emergency fund. Financial service professionals often suggest keeping somewhere around 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses set aside here. Now, that money acts as a safety net if something unexpected happens, like let's say maybe a job change or a major repair or another surprise expense. Having that emergency funds in place can actually help you avoid relying on high interest cards, credit cards, or let's say expensive loans when life throws you a curveball.
Right, and life often throws us curveballs. That's the problem, right?
Mhm.
But having a safety net probably makes it easier to relax and not worry so much about the spending.
Yeah, it really does. Because once your fixed expenses are covered and then your emergency fund is in good shape, well, now you can move on to that third bucket. And this is the one people usually like the most. And that's the splurge bucket, if you want to call it that, or your discretionary spending bucket. This is the money you can use however you want. And if you want to, let's say, take a trip, buy a new phone, upgrade your laptop, or even treat yourself to something special, this is where that spending can now come from. And if the money is already there, well, you can enjoy that purchase without guilt because you know the rest of your financial plan is still intact.
Yeah, and the idea isn't to eliminate splurges, it's just to
Mm.
plan ahead for them, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. I mean, where people tend to run into trouble here, Tony, is when those splurges happen unexpectedly and get
Yeah.
put on, let's say, a credit card without a clear
Mhm.
plan to pay them off. And then maybe it's a vacation that gets charged to a card, or let's say a purchase that seems small at the time, but then ends up carrying a balance month after month. That's when spending can start creating stress instead of enjoyment. So but when those excuse me, purchases become, let's say, come out of your discretionary bucket or money that's already been set aside for that purpose, well, now you can enjoy them without feeling like you've done something financially irresponsible.
Yeah. Well, and I love the bucket idea, because it's practical,
hmm
but I'm guessing some of our listeners out there, might be wondering how it works with actual numbers, right?
Yeah. All
It's
right.
easy to say, "Hey, you've got this bucket over here and this other bucket over here for other stuff or other times," but, how does that look?
All right, let's give you an example. Let's say someone brings home about $8,000 per month after taxes, and their fixed monthly expenses for things like housing, utilities, insurance, groceries, and regular savings contributions total about, let's say, 4,000. In that case, the fixed bucket would take up that $4,000. That means all the essentials are covered, and your retirement savings goals are ready. Let's say already built into that part of that plan. Now, then let's say another 2,000 goes into the emergency bucket. Now that the exact amount someone puts here will depend on where they are in building that, let's say 3 to 6 months safety net that we talked about earlier. But if someone is still working toward that goal, they might prioritize adding more to this bucket for a while. But once those two buckets are taken care of, that still leaves $2,000 available for the splurge bucket.
Mm. Yeah, I like that idea of a splurge bucket. So the 2,000 then is basically your enjoy life money, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Or the
nice and
guilt-free
fudge.
spending money.
Yep.
You can spend that money guilt-free, you don't have to track it, you've got that.
Yes, and that money you could use for anything from travel, hobbies, dining out, technology upgrades, or whatever brings you enjoyment. That's the key. Remember, enjoyment. And the key point is that if the first two buckets are already covered, well, that spending doesn't have to come with guilt, like you said, because the important financial priorities have already been addressed.
Well, yeah, that's true. You have to get the priorities addressed. But what about those moments when extra money shows up? Like, let's say a
Ah,
tax refund. We're in tax
mhm,
season now. Some people are going to
yes.
be getting a refund, or maybe you get a bonus at work or a raise. What do you do with that? How should that be handled? What would you recommend?
Well, those moments can actually be powerful opportunities to straighten your financial strategy. If your, let's say, discretionary spending is already comfortably covered, it can be wise to direct those windfalls towards your longer term goals instead. So, for example, a tax refund or a bonus could go towards boosting your retirement savings or helping you finish building that emergency fund. Raises are another big one. When income increases, it can be a good time to increase your retirement contribution rate as well. That way, part of that raise goes towards strengthening your future, instead of quietly disappearing into your higher day to day spending.
Yeah, well, and that probably helps prevent what you mentioned earlier is lifestyle creep,
Mhm.
which happens to people, right?
Oh, yes.
They spend the more they get, the more they spend. They up that lifestyle, and then their cost of living has gone up, and it's hard to reverse that.
Yeah, especially when you were creatures of habits.
Yeah,
And yes, you have to, being intentional with those increases, let's say in income, can make a big difference over time. And really, the whole conversation comes down to being intentional about how you spend and how you save. The goal isn't to eliminate enjoyment from your financial life, not at all. It's to create a structure where you can enjoy your money today without putting your future security at risk.
yeah, yeah, and that probably helps. I think some people actually hear the word strategy or buckets and think it sounds a little complicated, but it helps to have you explain it or work with a professional like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that people can still get confused, overwhelmed. But if the bucket approach feels like too much structure, then the most important thing is simply just having a budget and sticking to it. We do our budget. That's the biggest core part of our foundation of our plan. And however someone organizes their finances, the key is knowing what you can truly afford before making a big purchase. If something you want isn't currently in the budget, one option is to set aside, let's say, a little bit more from each paycheck till you have enough saved to pay for it comfortably. That way you can still enjoy, let's say, that purchase when the time comes without relying on debt or putting stress on the rest of your financial strategy.
Yeah. Well, and there you go. Before we keep going, I think that's the main point is work with somebody like yourself. So how can our listeners out there get a hold of you, Albert?
Yeah, folks, you can give us a call at 586-752-7008 or visit us online at www.kaizenfinancialinc.com. Scheduling a consultation only takes a few minutes, and we're always here to help you own your retirement.
All right, and that's the key right there. Now, how, where are we going to go? I know that you had a second article that kind of deals like with this, right?
Yeah, yeah. We have another Kiplinger article that's titled, Are You a Retirement Millionaire Too Afraid to Spend? Great article. I see this a lot. If you've been able to build, let's say, a nice sizable nest egg, but are apprehensive to enjoy some of it, there are 6 solid steps that you may be able to use to overcome those feelings.
Okay, so let's dig into this. I imagine hesitation is natural there after decades of saving.
Yes.
People probably get used to being really careful with their money, don't they?
Absolutely. And many people spend their entire working lives being disciplined savers. They build habits around being cautious with money, delaying purchases, and prioritizing the future. Then retirement arrives, and suddenly the plan shifts. Instead of saving and accumulating, the goal becomes using that money to support the life you want to live. Well, now that can require a real mindset change. One of the first steps is recognizing that the whole purpose of saving all those years was so you could eventually use that money. The nest egg isn't just there to sit untouched forever, it's there to support your lifestyle once you're no longer working. And one way to make this shift easier is to connect your money to purpose. For example, maybe you save so you could travel more, spend more time with your family, or help your children or grandchildren with, let's say, major life milestones. When people connect their money to those kinds of meaningful goals or values, spending it often feels much more comfortable.
Sure. Well, yeah, and that's where it's at, and we all want to be comfortable. It makes sense because when money is tied to something, especially something meaningful, it doesn't feel like wasting it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the idea. In fact, it feels like using it the way it was intended. Again, assigning jobs for all your assets. And another important step is being intentional about how much you actually plan to spend in retirement. One way some financial service professionals describe retirement is like climbing a mountain. During your working years, building wealth and working your way up toward the summit to the point where you've accumulated enough to retire. Once you reach the peak, the journey changes. Instead of climbing upward, you're beginning descending the mountain as you gradually draw down your savings to support your lifestyle. Now, for many people, that shift can feel uncomfortable. The balance in their accounts may slowly decline over time, and even if everything is going according to plan, that's why it can be helpful to determine in advance how much you're comfortable spending each year and how much you ultimately want to leave behind for your family, charity, and let's say other goals. Having those numbers clearly defined can give people the confidence now to enjoy the money that remains.
Yeah. Yeah, and, I assume that's where having a strategy and working with somebody like yourself really becomes important, doesn't it?
Your assumption is spot on, Tony. In fact, once you reach retirement, it's not just about how much you save, it's about how you withdraw those funds. Many retirees have money in multiple accounts, let's say like IRAs, 401ks, brokerage accounts, or even Roth accounts. Each of those accounts can have a different tax considerations and eventually require minimum distributions may come into play as well. So that's why developing a thoughtful withdrawal strategy can make a big difference. Now, some approaches are designed to help retirees adjust their spending based on market conditions, while others focus on ensuring essential expenses are always covered first. The goal is to create a system that provides both structure and confidence so you can feel comfortable spending without constantly worrying about whether you're making a mistake.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure market volatility, that we've seen a lot of lately can add another layer of anxiety for people,
Whew.
especially once they're in retirement and with
Yes.
their money, right?
Yes, it certainly can. You want people see people react. Oh, we're not going out tonight because the market just dropped 0.5%, right? When markets are choppy, boy, I tell you, some retirees instinctively just pull back on spending out of fear that their savings might not last. Now, that's why testing different scenarios within a financial strategy is so valuable. And for example, what happens if markets have a rough year? What happens if returns are lower than expected for a period of time? If a financial strategy can withstand those types of scenarios, it can give you the confidence to continue enjoying your retirement without overreacting to short term market movements or economy movements, or more importantly, even our government moves. So, if the plan shows potential challenges, then that simply means it may be time to remake some adjustments.
Sure. And that brings us back to planning, which you've been talking about the entire show, right?
Mhm. Planning creates possibility and also provides a path for you. Another helpful idea is creating what some people I say call a permission to spend budget. And I might use that. That's a nice little term, permission to
Permission to
spend
spend.
budget.
Yeah.
And in other words, if travel is, let's say, is something you've always wanted to do in retirement, well, then include it in your financial strategy. If helping family members is important to you, plan for that as well. When those goals are already built into your strategy, spending that money now doesn't feel reckless. It simply feels like following through on the strategy and purposes you created.
Right. Well, and yeah, I think that's really important. So, today's takeaway, I think, this whole thing helps people avoid the regret of being too cautious.
Mhm.
We're so used to saving, we're so used to putting things away and not touching it for retirement. Once we get into retirement, the fear of running out keeps us from maybe spending when we should, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point, Tony. Retirement tends to unfold in phases. Early on, people often have the most energy and the most interest in travel, hobbies, and new experiences. As time goes on, spending patterns often change naturally. If someone spends, let's say, those early years being overly cautious and holding back on the things they wanted to do, they may miss opportunities they can't easily recreate later. And that's why it's important to remember that retirement Isn't just about preserving money, folks. It's also about making the most of the time that you have. If you built, let's say, a solid financial foundation and have a thoughtful strategy in place, the goal should be to use those resources to support the life you've worked so hard to create.
Yeah. Well, and I think the takeaway here is that you don't have to feel guilty about enjoying your money as long as it's part of a strategy then.
I agree with you there. Exactly. Saving for the future is important. Don't get me wrong, it's very important. But the
Mhm.
purpose of that saving is to eventually what? Support the life you want to live. Most people just you need a clear vision. You need to have intentional spending and the right strategy. People can often then find a healthy balance between protecting their future and enjoying the present.
All right. Well, a lot of great information, great show today. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners until next time?
Yeah, folks, if you got questions about your retirement plan, your financial strategy, or your permission to spend budget, please go to my website, www.kaizenfinancialinc.com, or call my office at 586-752-7008. Remember, we love to help you protect your savings and feel confident about the road ahead so that you can own your retirement.
All right. And that does it for today's episode of Own Your Retirement with our host, Albert Lalonde.